As you know, we're continuing our sermon series called Surprise the World, based on the book by Michael Frost. And all throughout this month, we have been learning about particular practices or habits that will help us to grow in our faith and connect with our neighbors. And so far, we've learned what it means to bless others, whether through words of affirmation or through doing a kind act for them, how to bless others. Last week, we talked about how eating a meal, sharing a meal with a friend isn't simply just a nice pleasantry, it's a holy act of connecting with others. And so today, we're going to be talking about listening for the Holy Spirit. I invite us, as you're able to, please stand. Let us honor the reading of our gospel lesson this morning, coming from Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 5. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Several years ago, I was at another church, and I was part of a committee that was tasked with the responsibility of discerning and coming up with a new vision statement for the church. Our committee, we met frequently, we talked together, we prayed a lot, we searched the scriptures until we found a statement that we believed summarized who we were as a church. And the vision statement that we found was a verse from John. And to set the larger context, in John's gospel, there are some Greeks who come to the disciples and they say to the disciples, "We want to see Jesus." And that phrase kind of jumped out at us. We want to see Jesus. And so we prayed over it, we talked about it, and we said, we think this phrase, "we want to see Jesus," is our new vision statement as a church. And so we made that motion, it was seconded, and our community approved it, and like good Methodists, we then forwarded it to our church council, and they prayed over it, and they talked about it for a while and discerned, and someone made a motion, it was seconded, and it was approved unanimously. And so we put that new vision statement, "We want to see Jesus," on posters and banners all over the church campus and facilities. A few weeks later, I saw one of our youth standing in the hallway, and she was looking at the poster that had our new vision statement on it. And she was looking at it, and I walked up to her, and she said to me, "Yeah, about this statement, we want to see Jesus." I said, "Yeah, well, what about it?" She said, "Yeah, I don't think this works." I said, "What do you mean?" I think, yeah, we need to go back and come up with a new vision statement. This isn't working. And I thought to myself, oh, okay, teenager who just knows everything, wants to change an entire vision statement that we have carefully prayed over and discerned and made a motion on it, and it got seconded and it got approved officially by our church council, unanimously, and by the way, by we spiritually mature adults. I decided to humor her and say, "Oh, well, what statement would you come up with?" She said, "Well, I think our vision statement should be, we are seeing Jesus." I mean, I see Jesus all the time. I come here to worship at church, and I go to youth group, and we go on mission trips together, and I talk to my friends about Jesus, and I'm seeing Jesus all the time. And if church people are saying that they just want to see Jesus and they're not already seeing Jesus, well, then they've got a problem, don't they? And I looked at her and I said to her in love, "Go away. Don't you have somewhere to be?" It was one of those moments when I was confronted by the challenge or the mystery of why some people have better sight or insight. Why do some people have a better glimpse into the things of God and others don't? In light of today's gospel lesson, in light of today's theme, I'm going to suggest that some people are better able to see the things of God because they are good listeners. They are good at listening for the Spirit. Listening is a big deal biblically. In the Bible, hearing is actually more important than seeing. Over in the beginning chapters of Genesis, in the creation story, Eve listened to the voice of the serpent. Adam listened to the voice of Eve. Thus, their deception was the result of who they were listening to. And over again in the Old Testament, God rewards those who listen to His words, who listen and obey His commandments. Over in the Gospels, Jesus will end a parable or a saying by saying something like, if anyone has ears, let them listen. In John's Gospel, in John 10, Jesus says that He is the good shepherd and His sheep know Him because they listen to His voice. Paul says that salvation comes from hearing the gospel. And one of the refrains that is repeated a couple of times in the book of Revelation is, let those who have ears listen to what the Spirit is saying. Our gospel lesson this morning is Matthew's version of the Transfiguration, where Jesus takes three of His closest disciples, Peter and James and his brother John, to the top of a mountain where they witness Jesus transfigured or changed. His appearance transforms into a brightness that shines like the sun. And there, while they're looking at that, they see the figures of Moses and Elijah, two people from the Old Testament who haven't been seen in centuries. They're talking with Jesus. And then Peter just blurts out, Lord, it's good that we're here. Why don't I make 3 dwellings, one for you and one for Peter, and one for Moses and one for Elijah? Peter doesn't know what to make of this scene. He doesn't know how to comprehend what his eyes see, so he's trying to fill up the moment with words. I love how Peter is speaking, and Matthew says that a voice from the clouds interrupts him, as if to say, quiet, be quiet. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to Him. Notice the voice doesn't say, look at Him, or obey Him, or even love Him. The first command from the cloud is listen to Him. And so I want to suggest that listening is the foundation for our discipleship. Listening is foundational for following. Listening to Jesus, letting His words soak into our lives, letting His speech shape our speech. Listening to Jesus will lead us into obeying and loving Him. There's an interesting connection between our eyes and our ears. Now, other people have pointed this out, I think, on social media and elsewhere, but you ever notice that when you're driving in the car and you're listening to music or listening to the radio and you suddenly realize you're lost and you don't quite know where to go, what's the first thing you do? Turn your radio down, turn the music off so that you can see better. Isn't that interesting? There's a connection between our ears and our eyes. Have you ever noticed that when you ask someone to listen to a piece of music or listen to a song intently, what do? They close their eyes. We listen better with our eyes closed. As a pastor, I can confirm this truth. After 31 years of looking out at congregations, and some of you all are listening intently with your eyes closed, I am amazed by how listening is such a discipline. Some of you are on your phones taking notes, using your notes app. I can just tell. This week we're going to be focusing on our next challenge to try to listen for the Spirit. We're going to push ourselves a little bit, maybe to a place that some of us may be uncomfortable with, particularly those of us in the Gen X generation, Generation X. My generation, we gave the world MTV and video game arcades and Walkman. I don't know if the world's better off for this or not, but listening requires silence, and that is one thing that is really unsettling and uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's interesting how silence can be a bit frightening for us. Have you ever talked to someone, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone you're new to and you're trying to get to know, and you're running out of things to say, and the conversation just comes to a dead halt, and you can't think of anything to say, and there's this awkward moment of silence, and you think, oh, this is a failure. We're never going to be friends. We can't talk about anything. We're afraid of the silence. We're trained to see silence as a negative thing in and of itself. And I've noticed over the past 10, 15, 20 years how this aversion to silence even shapes how we do worship. We always think in terms of worship as transition. Transitioning from one thing to another, one element of worship to another. And we either want there to be a really quick transition, or if it's a long transition, we want music to be played. Because we just can't bear with the silence. There's something awkward about silence for us. We're desperate to fill the silence with noise, with music, with words. The late Henry Nouwen wrote a little book called The Way of the Heart, and it's a book about connecting with God through silence. And he tells of an experience of driving through Los Angeles one day, and he noticed that everywhere he looked, there were billboards, there were signs, there were messages. Everywhere he looked, there were words and slogans and phrases, and he said that he had the strangest sensation as if he were driving through a dictionary. And he said he had this epiphany. He reflected on this and he wrote, one of our main problems in our chatty society is that silence has become a very fearful thing. Many experience silence not as full and rich, but as empty and hollow. For them, silence is like a gaping abyss that will swallow them up. The early church fathers and mothers sought out silence, but we, modern disciples, we try to avoid silence. Think about if you've ever visited a friend or relative and they're going through a major life crisis, maybe a divorce or a job loss, or maybe they've lost a loved one. And I bet before you visited them, you wanted to think of all the things that you're going to say to them to try to help them feel better, to help maybe shoulder the burden with them. And so you wanted to maybe read some Bible verses, think of some supportive phrases, some supportive words to give to them, some sage advice. Because when someone's in pain and we're in their presence, our first thing is to fill up the silence with words. But sometimes words just aren't enough. And even though we may not be able to offer the right words, simply by offering our presence and reaching out our hands is enough. Matthew's account of the transfiguration of Christ is a story about listening. It's about trusting our ears more than our eyes. The disciples see something indescribable, a dazzling light, Jesus transformed, transfigured, and a voice from the cloud saying, "This is my Son, listen to him." It's interesting that right before this scene, Jesus is telling the disciples that the Messiah must undergo great suffering. The Messiah is going to be handed over, will be betrayed, and will undergo great suffering and will be killed. But Peter, he objects, because Peter doesn't want to hear any of this kind of talk. But on the mountain, God declares, "This is my Son, listen to him." Jesus is leading the disciples, and they are making their way towards Jerusalem, that great city, the seat of great economic and religious and political power. There in Jerusalem, they will see things that will compete for their attention. They will see the might of Rome on full display. Occasionally, the Romans would throw a military parade. They like to flex their muscles to remind people of who's in charge. They will see the great temple in all of its splendor and all of its grandeur, standing as if it's going to be there for all eternity. And there in Jerusalem, they will see the wealth of the powerful and the elite on display. In other words, the disciples are about to face a hearing test. Will they trust their eyes or will they trust their ears? Will their lives be shaped by what they see around them, or will their lives be shaped by what they hear from their Lord? And it's a hearing test that we modern disciples get to face every day. It's a hearing test for us. Will we listen to the voice of Jesus amidst all the other voices and distractions in our lives? Words do matter. Words shape us. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to sort of personally take on this challenge. I invited you all to take this on with me during Lent, to read the Sermon on the Mount once a week during Lent. I just want to see how the voice of Jesus, how the words of Jesus might transfigure us, transform us, how they might shape us. Which brings us back to this week's habit. And I think, at least for me, it's one of the hardest habits to take on: listening. Being in silence and listening for the Spirit. Because in order to listen, we have to cease from talking and cease from listening to other things, other voices, other distractions around us. And as every school teacher points out to their students, the word listen has the same letters as the word silence. Heard that from some school teachers, right? So for this week, I want you to find one day during the week and some time during that one day of the week to just simply listen, to be in complete silence. Now, if you've never done this before, I just want you to start small. Start with just 5 minutes. Now, you think 5 minutes, oh, that's a breeze. 5 minutes is nothing. But believe me, when you realize how distracted and how noisy our world is, 5 minutes is going to seem like an eternity. And if you want to, maybe the next week, add on to it. Maybe go 6 minutes, then 8. Just kind of gradually add on. And don't put on any soothing background music. Don't put on any white noise. Try to find the place with no noise, with absolute no distractions. To just sit and listen. Find a comfortable posture. Some people use a centering prayer to help them to focus. It could be simply, Holy Spirit, speak to me. Or, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. Now, I will warn you, if you're a person that likes results, if you like something that's measurable, obtainable, and you want to see the results, this is going to be really hard. Because we love to get results. I would love to say that, doing this for 5 minutes, one time a week is going to change your life immediately. You're going to see the results. No, you got to play the long game. The point of prayer is not going to God to get something from God. Really, the whole point of prayer, if you read the saints, the whole point of prayer is simply to get God, to be in God's presence, to commune. Former news anchor Dan Rather once interviewed Mother Teresa, and he asked her that Mother Teresa, when you pray, what do you say to God? And she answered, I don't say anything, I listen. So rather than turn the question around, he said, okay, well then, what does God say? Mother Teresa smiled and she answered, he doesn't say anything, he just listens. And the veteran journalist didn't quite know what to do with this, and Mother Teresa added, and if you don't understand that, then I can't explain it to you. when we cultivate the practice of listening for the Spirit, then we too will gradually be transfigured, transformed. When we listen, we are better able to see the things of God, to see the image of God in others. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen